Yeah, I got it. Okay, it's going. No, it's when you hit record.
The bottom, yeah, exactly.
The record signal comes up.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm recording now, everyone. So watch your words. So you can't see. Yeah, you're all muted except me. I'm talking to myself. Okay, shall we start? Let's start. Hello, Anthony. Hello, everyone else. Archana, B. I'm not sure who B is. Rachel, welcome. Yeah, let's start with a little bit of motivation. All right, so just take a moment, silence, try to generate a bodhicitta motivation, since we are studying the commentary on bodhicitta, right? So we need to try to generate bodhicitta motivation. So remember ultimate bodhicitta, meaning mind realizing emptiness. So try to remember how oneself, the agent or the actor, the action and the object of action are all in the nature of dependent arising. Without an actor, there's no action. Without action, there's no actor. Without an object of action, there's also no agent or action. So how everything is dependent arising and therefore empty of existing from its own side. And then because of not understanding this and grasping at the opposite, grasping at oneself and other people and other objects, inanimate objects, because of grasping at things as existing from their own side, then for that reason, then sentient beings, they generate a self-centered attitude, and then generate attachment for things they like, aversion for things they don't like, and then create contaminated karma, especially negative karma, which produces suffering and all of samsara. Right? So try to generate the motivation in order to free oneself and all sentient beings from the suffering of samsara, and in order to lead oneself and all sentient beings to the state of full enlightenment. Therefore, I myself must quickly become enlightened. Therefore, I'll engage in this review of His Holiness teachings on Nagarjuna's commentary on bodhicitta. Okay. So today I'm going to ask for questions first thing. So does anybody have questions right now? I know you all listened to His Holiness talk this morning. You've been reading Nagarjuna's commentary on bodhicitta and contemplating on it all day long. And now, do you have any questions? Okay, not yet. You're a little shy. There's a little bit of a shy group here. Dilshad maybe just woke up. Yeah, okay. There's no questions yet. Anyway, if you have any questions, you just type them right in the chat as soon as they come to mind. Don't hesitate, or just raise your virtual hand and you can click on participants at the bottom. And yeah, and then how do you do it actually? I don't have a little thing in mind. Maybe because I'm the host, I don't have that raise hand option. Otherwise, I was going to model raising hand.
Yeah, it's because you're co-host in Venerable.
Okay. Okay. Anyway, or you can just click on, oh yeah, well, I can't do that either. Okay, so again, His Holiness gave he just gave a very brief introductory talk at the beginning, and then spent most of the session going through the actual text. His Holiness completed going through the whole text today. So that's what we'll mainly do as well. And then His Holiness answered a few questions at the end, but the questions today weren't so interesting as yesterday, in my opinion. So, okay. So what did he do? His Holiness started by mentioning that tomorrow is the celebration of descent from Tushita, heaven, Labab Duchen. La means deity, or here it means like a heaven. Labab means to descend from, and then Duchen means it's the great day, the great time. So it's also saying some people, you know, they talk about how, well, because why is Lava Drupchen celebrated? Because it's the time when the Buddha, out of remembering the kindness of his own mother. So remember the Buddha's, okay, Dilshad has a question, Alea. Okay, great. We'll come back to it in just a moment, Dilshad. Thank you for your question. That's excellent. Very good question too, right on target. So yeah, so the Buddha's mother, I think her name was Mahadevi, I believe. She died in about a week after giving birth to Prince Siddhartha. And then she took rebirth in the heaven of the 33, in one heaven, in the desire realm. So, and the Buddha, after he became enlightened, I think about a year or so after he was enlightened, within a year or so, he went to the heaven of the 33 by power of his miraculous powers. He went there and taught her the Dharma, and taught in order to repay her kindness for having carried him in the womb and given birth to him. Then he went and taught her the Dharma. So, and I think he spent, in human time, I think it was like 3 months. He spent one rainy season, one rains retreat, so about 3 months in the summer, he spent in that Tushita heaven teaching the Dharma. And then at the end of that, when he came back to earth, apparently like a staircase of light, appeared, and he descended at Sankisa, I believe. There's a huge stupa at Sankisa. His Holiness has been to teach at Sankisa. It's somewhere near Delhi, I believe. Kunben, have you been there? No. Okay. Anyway, His Holiness is taught there. There's a big Buddhist community there, apparently. And yeah, so His Holiness was saying, some people say that, oh, Buddha is so amazing because he displayed miracles like that, but actually that's not really why the Buddha is amazing. It's not because he displayed miracles. The more amazing thing about the Buddha is if you read what he taught, that he, you read in the sutras, that the Buddha taught this view that everything is an interdependently arising phenomena, and therefore things are empty of existing from their own side, and taught the two truths, the Four Noble Truths, the six perfections, the pathway to enlightenment. That's the really amazing thing. So if you want to know about the Buddha's qualities, you need to look at his teachings. And then His Holiness was saying how incredibly intelligent the ancient Nalanda scholars were. If you read their commentaries on the sutras, their way of unpacking, explaining what the Buddha taught, how it's and explaining what the mind is and the different aspects of the mind, how to recognize afflictive states of mind versus, healing positive states of mind, and then how to cultivate the one and reduce the other. It's just amazing, profound kind of psychology and also philosophy and logical. And then His Holiness spoke quite a while about the three turnings of the wheel of Dharma, and then about the Four Noble Truths. So we spoke a little bit about yesterday, but just to kind of repeat and elaborate a little bit on what His Holiness said this morning. So again, there's three turnings of the wheel of Dharma. They're not strictly in sequential order. So why are they called the first turning, the second turning, the third turning? Because of the time when they were first taught, right? So the sutras, well, the first formal teaching the Buddha gave was, so you guys are all muted, so I can't hear you. It's kind of boring. But was where? Yeah, I can't hear you. In Sarnath, Deer Park in Sarnath. And what did he teach? He taught the Four Noble Truths, right? It's the first thing the Buddha taught. Why did he teach the Four Noble Truths? It's kind of like the table of contents, because everything else the Buddha is going to teach for the next 40 years is related to and included in the teaching on the Four Noble Truths, right? So the teaching of the Four Noble Truths and the understanding of the Four Noble Truths is really like the overarching framework for all of the Buddhist teachings. So that first sutra, it's, I don't remember the name of it right offhand, but it's something like the Sutra of Turning the Wheel of Dharma, or something like that. But that belongs to the first turning of the wheel of Dharma, and that's part of the Pali Canon. It's included in the Pali Canon. It's also in the the Tibetan Canon, which is translated from Sanskrit primarily. But then it's not that. And then, so then 1 year later, the Buddha, like I said yesterday, he taught the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, including the Heart Sutra at Vulture's Peak in Rajgir. So that was the first teaching of the second turning of the wheel of Dharma, right? So it's not the case that once the Buddha gave, the first teaching that belongs to the second turning of the wheel of Dharma, that he never gave, that he never taught sutras belonging to the first turning of the wheel of Dharma, right? It's not like that. So then from 1 year after the Buddha was enlightened, he's teaching, sometimes sutras that belong to the perfection of wisdom, to the second turning of the wheel, sometimes sutras that belong to the first turning of the wheel, right? Like you look at the Mahaparinirvana Sutra, right? The last sutra that the Buddha taught. Actually the Mahaparinirvana Sutra, it's kind of consists of quite a few small teachings that the Buddha gave over about 2 months leading up to his final, showing the aspect of passing away. But the last, for example, the last sutra, the last Dharma talk the Buddha gave before he passed away, that belongs to the first turning of the wheel of Dharma, right? And it's, it's part of the Pali canon. It's also part of the Sanskrit canon. So then, okay, but then what His Holiness wasn't talking about all this. This is just my little spiel. So His Holiness was emphasizing that in the first turning of the wheel of Dharma, the Buddha primarily taught the Four Noble Truths, but the view of emptiness or selflessness that the Buddha taught was, well, first of all, in the first turning of the wheel of Dharma, the Buddha taught that everything inherently exists. Everything exists from its own side, independently, has its own independent nature, right? Whereas in the second turning of the wheel of Dharma, what's the main thing the Buddha taught? Nothing inherently exists. Nothing exists from its own side. Nothing has independent nature, right? So they're totally opposite in that way, right? So then that caused a lot of confusion. You can imagine. It's kind of like, Donald Trump. One time say one thing, one time say the very opposite thing. You cannot count all the votes in Pennsylvania, but you have to count all the votes in Arizona. It's like, what are you talking about? So then, just to throw in a little American politics, all right, spice up this session. So then, because that obviously caused confusion, then in the third turning of the wheel of Dharma, for people who are utterly confused especially bodhisattvas who are, little dull faculty bodhisattvas, they see that in the first turn of the wheel of Dharma, the Buddha says not everything inherently exists. In the second turn of the wheel of Dharma, he says nothing inherently exists. And what do you make of this? So in the third turn of the wheel of the Dharma, the Buddha divided all things into three types, right? They're called other powered phenomena, which basically includes all impermanent phenomena, right? Other powered phenomena, and then thoroughly established phenomena, which is emptiness. Basically, there's different kinds of emptiness according to the mind-only school, but it's whatever is a selflessness of persons or selflessness of phenomena, that's called a thoroughly established phenomena. So of course it's permanent, but it's an ultimate truth versus a conventional truth. So there's other powered phenomena, which is all impermanent phenomena. So this is according to mind-only school, right? Mind-only school is based on the third turning of the wheel of Dharma, right? So in the third turn of the wheel of Dharma, the Buddha taught us all phenomena are included in these three types: other powered phenomena, which is equivalent to all impermanent things. Then thoroughly established phenomena, which is equal to ultimate truth. Whatever is ultimate truth, what is it? Emptiness. And then the third one is called kunda, means kind of imputed phenomena, we can say. So that's all permanent phenomena that are conventional truths, right? Or all permanent phenomena that are not ultimate truth, right? So those are called the imputed, kun, all imputed, I guess you can say. Anyway, so the Buddha divided up these three kind of phenomena, and then he said, the first two, the thoroughly established and the other powered phenomena, those are inherently existent. And then the third, the imputed phenomena, they are not inherently existent. And that is the ultimate intent of these first two turnings of the wheel of Dharma. So that's according to the mind-only school. Yeah, but okay, so there's more questions coming in. Great. Yeah. So the third turn of the wheel of Dharma is taught for people, and also in the third turn of the wheel of Dharma, then the Buddha, unlike the other two, he taught that all phenomena are in the nature of the mind, right? So when we observe objects, it appears as if they have some external existence, like they're not part of our mind. They're not projections of our mind. You know, when we see, especially think of objects of the senses, things that we see, sounds that we hear, it looks like, you know, they have their own independent existence separate from my mind out there. Whereas in the third turn of the wheel of the Dharma, teaching for, teaching this mind-only school view, the Buddha taught that actually all those things that appear to externally exist, they actually are just like appearances in a dream, right? Just like sounds and, shapes and colors and, environments that appear in a dream, they appear to have external reality, but they don't. They're just projections of our mind, of forces in our mind. So just like that, then in our waking state as well, all the things that appear to have some external reality around us, actually those appearances and those objects themselves are produced from imprints, right? Imprints that were placed in our mind in the past, right? At a previous time, in past lives or earlier in this life. So whenever we have an experience, it puts imprints in the mind. When those imprints meet with they're like seeds, just like seeds, when they meet with the right conditions for them to produce a sprout, to produce a result, like moisture, soil, warmth of sunlight, and so forth, they produce, so when the imprints in our mind, when they meet with the right conditions, then arising from those imprints is both a consciousness and the object of that consciousness, right? So for example, when we see an object, like here's my mug again, this is my favorite object, right? I'll show you all, my mug. So when we see an object, like see a mug, so it looks like that mug has some external reality, but does it really? According to mind-only school, no, no, no. So the mug and my eye consciousness that sees the mug, those both arise from one imprint in the mind, right? So actually the mug and anything, any external thing is actually one entity with the consciousness that observes it. So that's not to say that everything is consciousness. That's going too far. It's to say everything is one nature with consciousness, right? So for something to be one nature with your mind, it doesn't mean it is your mind, right? It means it's like part of the same lump of stuff, right? Just like for something to be one nature with my mug, it doesn't have to be the mug. Like all the particles that make up the mug, the handle of the mug is one nature with the mug. Why? Because it's part of it. All the clay and the what do you say this enamel? I don't know what's on the outside, glaze and so forth. All that is one nature with the mug, but it's not the mug, right? So just like that, the things external, according to mind-only school, external things we observe, they're not our mind, but they're not a separate entity from our mind. They're one entity. They're part of the same thing, right? So His Holiness was emphasizing how although that's not a correct view, because later we'll see in the text that that view is refuted by, especially the middle way consequentialist school. But just having that view that everything we see is a projection of our mind, it does help to reduce our grasping at things. So for example, when we see delicious food, or we see an attractive person, or somebody says something to us that we find really offensive and disturbing to our mind, then if we can have this kind of view that actually the appearance of the sound of someone talking to me, the taste of the food, the appearance of the person that I'm attracted to, that those appearances are just projections of my mind. Already that helps to reduce this grasping, right? The strong grasping at other things that we find attractive or repulsive, right? So His Holiness was emphasizing that although the mind-only school view, it's not an ultimate right view, but it does, you guys aren't listening to Tibetan. In Tibetan, His Holiness is using this phrase again and again, which I never noticed before this year. He says, ate zimba, ate zimba. So I asked a couple of my Tibetan friends what that means exactly. Ate zimba. It sort of means like you just immediately grasp at something as being just the way it appears. without questioning whatsoever, right? So like think of, someone, like someone tells you something that, and you just immediately believe right away, like, oh yeah, that's the way it is, without any further questioning. So this atezimba is kind of like just grasping at things without any reflection, without any questioning, without any doubt, just grasping at things as existing in just the way they appear, right? Without any analysis. So, so already this mind, having this mind-only school view, where the view that everything is like a dream, and that it's the appearances, the way things appear, and the things that themselves, not only the way things appear, but the things that appear themselves are projections of my mind. They don't have any existence independent from or separate from one's own mind. That helps to reduce this grasping at things, strong clinging to things. And then, but His Holiness was saying, just to go back again. So in the first turning the wheel of Dharma, they taught the Four Noble Truths, but emphasized the truth of suffering, that our body, our mind, as we've taken rebirth in samsara, that they're in the nature of suffering, of dissatisfaction. And the causes of those, the causes of these dissatisfying experiences we have are afflictions in our own mind. The causes exist in our own mind, not outside. The problem is not other people. The problem is our own afflictive emotions and the karma we've created. So emphasizing the first of the Four Noble Truths, the truth of suffering, the truth of causes of suffering. And then just briefly, introduced in the first turn of the wheel of Dharma, describe the truth of cessation and the truth of the path, but especially those two, the truth of cessation and the truth of the path, are very much elaborated on in the second turn of the wheel of Dharma, right? So in the second turn of the wheel of Dharma, the Buddha taught not only the path of hearers and solitary realizers, but the entire path of bodhisattvas. But the main thing the Buddha taught was emphasizing the truth of cessation is actually not just an elimination of grasping at a substantial, I think there's a substantial autonomous. I always forget the English term. Something like the own substantial existent person, we can say, Rangituba Zeta Drupa, own powered substantial existent person. Anyway, it's the kind of ignorance that is considered the root of samsara by the Sutra school and the Great Exposition school, where there's a kind of person within the aggregates that controls them, that has its own entity that's kind of not dependent on the aggregates, roughly. Anyway, so so the Buddha goes deeper in the second turn of the wheel of Dharma. He teaches that the real view that we need to generate is the view that because everything is a dependent arising, therefore nothing exists from its own side. So he teaches that view of emptiness, and then teaches the Bodhisattva path in an elaborate way, in great compassion and bodhicitta, of course. And then for the very intelligent bodhisattvas, in the third turn of the wheel of Dharma, the Buddha teaches that to deepen this understanding of emptiness, then that there's a more subtle level of mind. So that's where, so Dilshad has this question, what is aleya? I think you probably mean aleya vijnana. I think it's called aleya vijnana in Sanskrit, something like that. So yeah, His Holiness mentioned today, maybe the English translator probably used the Sanskrit term, that oh yeah, so aleya means this aleya vijnana, I think, or I'm not sure I'm getting the pronunciation right, but so according to the mind-only school, following the third turn of the wheel of Dharma, there are 8 consciousness, right, instead of 6. So for all the other tenet schools, the Great Exposition School, the Sutra School, and the Middle Way School, they all posit 6 consciousness, right, main minds. There's 5 sense consciousness, eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and body, sense conscious, and then mental consciousness, right? So the mind-only school adds 2 more, right? The one is called the foundational consciousness, which is sort of English for aleya vijnana. So, and then the other is called, called, what is it called? Kunshi and I don't even remember the Tibetan offhand. Kunshi and Yang. Anyway, so there's the foundational consciousness, and let me just silence my phone. Foundational consciousness is a neutral. It's never virtuous or non-virtuous. It's this neutral kind of mental consciousness which is always present, right? So it's a neutral consciousness which is the basis for all the other consciousness. So it's the most subtle of all them. According to the mind-only school, it's the most subtle, and it's the one that goes from life to life, and the one that holds all the imprints. Remember, for the mind-only school, imprints are extremely important. So, so all the imprints, whenever we have thoughts or experiences, the imprints of those are placed on this Aleya Vijnana, this foundational consciousness. That's why it's called the foundational consciousness, because it's the very basis for all of our experiences, the very basis for samsara. Remember, because samsara is basically a projection of our own mind, right? And that projection is the result of these imprints in our mind. And the very basis for those imprints, which holds those imprints, is this foundational consciousness, which goes in an unbroken continuum from life to life, and eventually goes to enlightenment when it's completely purified and developed. So that's the eighth consciousness. Then the seventh one is basically it's grasping at the self of persons. So the other consciousness. Remember, there's the five sense consciousness, the mental consciousness, and then there's this one I'm describing now, which I don't remember the name for it. But basically, what it is it's the most fundamental ignorance grasping at a self of persons, and that ignorance, it observes the foundational consciousness and grasps it as being substantially existent, autonomous person, right? And so it's a kind of ignorance. So that one has to be abandoned or transmuted into wisdom. Okay, so Aleya, so Dilshad, Aleya is this foundational consciousness in short. And then we have a question from Oregon, which is half in English and half in Tibetan. What is Tel Gyube Kelen for Ronik? Okay, they do not accept the Ronik, Oregon. They reject it. Ronik means self-cognizer, right? And Telgyura means consequential. So what is the consequential view of self-cognizer? Okay, in the mind-only school, they accept that there is a self-cognizer. For the consequentialist middle school, they say there is no self-cognizer. We can go into that more detail later if we have time. And then it seems Nagarjuna accepts Aleya. Why? No, Nagarjuna doesn't accept Aleya. But I'm not sure why you say it seems he does. You can point that out. If you see something, yeah, there are lines in the text, commentary on Bodhicitta, where it seems kind of Nagarjuna does accept it. But yeah, we can explain those away, actually. But I don't think he does. I'm almost sure there's nowhere Nagarjuna says there are 8 consciousness. He only accepts 6. As far as I know, Telgyura accepts, Telgyura only accepts 6 consciousness, not 8. Given the fact that Aleya is the 8th consciousness according to Tenzin, yeah, okay. When we say, from me, this is from Oregon. When we say that I'm looking at these questions in the chat, so you guys, you can open up your chat box too if you want to see the questions. When we say that in the first turning, the Buddha said everything exists inherently, did he say that explicitly or implicitly? He said it explicitly. So in the first turning of the wheel of Dharma, when the Buddha said everything exists inherently, that's explicit. In the beginning of the essence of eloquence, which was Holiness taught a couple of weeks ago, it's Lama Tsongkhapa quotes some sutra passages there where the Buddha explicitly says that. Can you cite an example of him saying things exist inherently? Yes, I can, but yeah, I don't have time to pull up the text right now. But I don't remember the name of the sutra either. But he clearly says it in Pali Canon. Deluded awareness. A really dumb question. Okay. I don't know what that is. Oh, I think the question follows. What is the difference between subjective view and objective view? Could you please explain this? Heard these during the English translation. Subjective view and objective view. I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm not sure what the English translator was translating with those terms. Subjective view and objective view. Yeah, that doesn't make sense to me either. Then second question, could you explain non-duality? Maybe we'll come back to that one. Yeah. Yeah, maybe. Yeah. Okay. So three turnings of the wheel of Dharma is like that. Then also, so in the third turning of the wheel of Dharma, as I said yesterday, the Buddha also, kind of explained more about Buddha nature, that all sentient beings have this potential to become enlightened because the most fundamental level of their mind is never well, you can say like this, it's never affected by obscurations, you could say. Or you could say like this, because, well, that's not quite true. It's more accurate to say, because any afflictive emotions that we have and any imprints of those afflictive emotions, whether it's anger, attachment, or ignorance, any of those afflicted states of mind, or any of the imprints of those, although they can affect, temporarily, they're all adventitious, basically. They temporarily arise due to certain causes and conditions, but they're never in the nature of the mind, right? So just like think about muddy water. Clear water, pure water, it can be muddied, when it rains heavily and the rain washes, soil from the fields and the forest, it goes into there's a clear river or clear spring, it goes into it, it temporarily obscures and muddies the water, but that sediment, the mud and that muddies the water, it's never of the nature of the water. So the water, the potential for the water to be pure, again, is always there and is never destroyed, is never affected. So our minds are like, that's the best example for our minds. So our minds, they, especially this, the mental consciousness, and the stream of consciousness goes from life to life. Although it can be obscured, kind of polluted, it is its potential to be purified and to fully develop into the omniscient mind of a Buddha is never destroyed, right? Never harmed whatsoever. So it's always there. So that especially is taught in the third turning of Dharma. Okay, so then His Holiness turned to the text. So he kind of reviewed a little bit in the text that, so the first, so just, I mentioned this yesterday, but the first part of the text is refuting the view of the self, that there's a permanent self that is totally independent from the aggregates, that goes from life to life. That view of self is held by non-Buddhist schools, ancient Indian schools. So first refutes that, Nagarjuna refutes that. Then Nagarjuna refutes the kind of partless particles and the kind of self held by the lower Buddhist schools, the Great Exposition and the Sutra school. And then Nagarjuna presents some views of the mind-only school and then refutes the mind-only school's assertion that especially that consciousness inherently exists, and points out problems with that. So that's kind of where we start from today. And then, and it's kind of surprising, actually, typically in this text and other texts, those two parts are the most difficult, when you have Nagarjuna or other middle way scholars, and especially consequentialist middle way scholars, refuting the views of like the Great Exposition school, refuting views of the Sutra school, refuting views of non-Buddhist, refuting views of the mind-only school. Those are really difficult parts in text to understand, because it's difficult to distinguish, well, when is it the middle way school saying something that they believe, or when are they saying something that is a view that they're refuting? It's difficult. And how are they refuting the views of others? So in this text, the first like the part His Holiness went through yesterday and a little bit of the beginning today. So the first 40 verses are really the most difficult part of the text. Then from then down, when you get into, you know, the middle way school's own presentation of emptiness and their own presentation of conventional bodhicitta, that's easy, right? Because we're so familiar with it, and they're just saying what they actually believe without this debate between someone who has a wrong view and then trying to refute that view, right? So anyway, we'll see when we go down. Yeah, okay. So I think now I'll just turn to a few more questions in the chat, and then I think we can turn to the text. Although, yeah, I'll point out a couple of verses that His Holiness quoted today too. Okay, where are we? B. Is there a correlation between, so this is a question in the chat. Is there a correlation between the 3 turnings of the wheel and the 4 tenet schools? For example, was Vaibhashika and Sautantrika taught in the first turning? If Buddha did not teach emptiness of phenomena in the first turning of the wheel, doesn't that mean nobody could attain arhatship according to Tsongkhapa? Wow, excellent question, B. Great. So, okay, so first, is there a correlation between the 3 turnings of the wheel and the 4 tenet schools? Yes. The first 2 of the 4 tenet schools, the first 2, the Great Exposition School and the Sutra School, are based on the first turning of the wheel exclusively. And generally, people who follow those tenet systems, they do not accept the sutras belonging to the second and third turning of the wheel of Dharma as the actual word of Buddha, right? They hold those sutras, which belong to the Pali Canon, to be something that were made up by later Buddhist monks, like Nagarjuna and, you know, Aryadeva and so forth, and not actually the word of the Buddha. To be, they hold that those are falsely asserted to be sutras spoken by the Buddha, right? So yes. So, and then the third turning of the wheel of Dharma is associated with the mind-only school. So the mind-only school position is entirely based on the third turning of the wheel of Dharma. And then the middle way school is entirely based upon the, or primarily based upon the second turning of the wheel of Dharma, right? So just to say again, there's a correlation between the first 2 tenet schools, the Great Exposition School and the Sautantrika School, or the Sutra School, with the first turning of the wheel of Dharma, right? And they don't accept the other 2 as the word of the Buddha. Then the middle way school, of which there's 2, remember, the autonomous middle way school and the consequentialist middle way school, they hold the second turning of the wheel of the Dharma to be the main teaching of the Buddha, or the definitive teaching of the Buddha, and the others to be interpretive teachings, right? And then the mind-only school holds the third turning of the wheel of Dharma to be definitive, or the main, the final intention of the Buddha's thought, and the first 2 turning of the wheel of Dharma to be interpretive, and not actually the final intention of the Buddha. So that's the correlation between the 4 schools and the 3 turnings of the wheel. Okay, if the Buddha did not teach emptiness of phenomena in the first turning of the wheel, doesn't that mean nobody could attain arhatship according to Tsongkhapa? Yes, it does. But the Buddha did teach emptiness in the first turning of the wheel of Dharma, and that brings us to the text. So let's look at our text now. This is the perfect segue. I think B is, I couldn't have planted a better person in the audience than B. Okay, so here we are. Oh, sorry, wrong text. Okay, I'll try this over. Here we are. So I don't know, I'm just in case that you guys are wondering, because my copy of the commentary on Awakening of the Mind looks very different from the copy that you have a link to on DalaiLama.com, right? Why? Because this copy is included in Geshe, I don't know if you know Geshe Dorje Damdrol's prayer book. Geshe Dorje Damdrol, the director of Tibet House, he has an excellent prayer book with lots of different texts that His Holiness emphasizes that we study and practice. So this text, the commentary on the Awakening Mind, is included in that prayer book. And I like the layout better. I found it easier to work with because it's just a single column. than the layout of the one that's put on dalailama.com. Okay, so here we are. His Holiness left off. He read up to about verse 25 yesterday. So we'll try to go through, the rest of the 75 verses right now. I shall write here very clearly, as explained in the ornament of Manjushi's Buddha Land Sutra. Okay, sorry, my internet connection cut off. Okay, I'm unmuted. I'm sharing my screen again. Anyway, I was on the wrong text there. So, all right, here we are. Verse 25. Is it big enough? Can you all see it? Nod if it's big enough. Yeah, okay, good. Anyway, I'll blow it up a little bit more. To overcome grasping at selfhood, the Buddha taught aggregates, elements, and so on by abiding in the state of mind only, right? So before this, the Buddha, the Nagarjuna was talking about the Great Exposition or the Vaibhashika and the Sautrantika school, the Great Exposition and Sutra school view of things. So now here he's introducing the mind only school view. So to overcome grasping at selfhood, that's what we're talking about. The Buddha taught that the aggregates, means our body and mind, the elements, earth, water, air, and fire, earth, water, fire, and air, and so on, by abiding in the state of mind only, so that those things are one nature with the mind. The beings of great fortune even renounce that teaching. So he's saying this mind only view of things will be renounced. Who are the beings of great fortune? Followers of the middle way school, right? They will renounce even this view of the mind only school. 26. So here Nagarjuna is going to be again sort of refuting the mind only school. For those who propound consciousness only, this manifold world is established as mind only. What might be the nature of that consciousness? I shall explain at this very point. So hold on. So one question for you all. So is consciousness impermanent? Yes, consciousness is impermanent. Of course, it's changing moment by moment. So remember, in the mind-only school, they divide all phenomena into three things, three types: other-powered phenomena, thoroughly established phenomena, and the imputed phenomena. So which does consciousness belong to? 1, 2, or 3? Does consciousness belong to, is it a thoroughly established phenomena? Man, you guys are blanking. No, it's not. Remember, thoroughly established phenomena means ultimate truth. Consciousness is a conventional truth. I think my screen froze, so I don't know if you can hear me, it's okay. All right, Archana is she typing in an answer in the chat? 2. No, sorry. No, it's 1. That's not so clear, but remember, consciousness is impermanent, therefore it's an other-powered phenomenon. Here, other in that phrase, other-powered means something is produced by its causes and conditions. It exists through the power of other, something other than it. What is the other? Its causes and conditions, right? Okay. Yeah. So consciousness is an other-powered phenomena. Therefore, remember, sorry, I didn't explain this clearly earlier, but all other powered phenomena are inherently existent. So for the mind-only school, consciousness is inherently existent. So that's the main thing Nagarjuna is going to refute, right? So when he says, what might be the nature of this consciousness, it's already kind of a hint. Nagarjuna is going to be talking about whether this consciousness that is so important for the mind-only school, whether it inherently exists or not, right? So for the mind-only school, it does inherently exist. It exists from its own side, by its own power. Well, it exists from its own side. Let's just leave it at that. But for the consequentialist middle way school, it does not exist from its own side. So that's the discussion. I shall now explain this very point. And 27, all of this is but one mind. That which was stated by the able one is to alleviate the fear of the childish. It is not a statement of final truth. Okay, so this is a very illuminating verse. This is talking about the 3 turnings of the wheel. So the Buddha said, all of this is but one's mind. That's a quotation from some sutra. That was stated by the Buddha. Why did the Buddha say that? That everything is basically of the nature of the mind? To alleviate the fear of the childish. So what does that mean? It means that remember in the second turning of the wheel of Dharma, the Buddha said nothing inherently exists. Now, some people find that very scary, right? To think that there is no inherent existence. Nothing has any, nothing exists by its own entity or from its own side. So for some people, they're prone to fall into nihilism. So they find that view scary. So they start to think, oh, that means I don't exist. Nothing exists. So those are the childish. So for those people who, if you explain to them too much, the fact that nothing inherently exists, that there's a danger that they fall into the view of nihilism for those people. But then the Buddha taught the mind-only view, where other powered and thoroughly established phenomena inherently exist, but the imputed phenomena do not inherently exist. Right. So that's what Nagarjuna is saying there. And especially, so all external phenomena, all objects of the senses are of the nature of the mind, or all objects are of one nature with the mind that apprehends them. And that mind is inherently existent. That is not a statement of the final truth. Right? Okay. Then 28, the imputed, the dependent. So here are these three types of things: the imputed, the dependent, and the consummate. Oh, that's a strange translation. The consummate. Anyway, that's what I was calling is, oh, no, sorry. That's the thoroughly established. All right, that's here. This is Tupin Jimba. Geshe Tupin Jimba's translation. So that's what I'm calling the thoroughly established. Anyway, remember there's these three types. The imputed is all permanent phenomena which are not ultimate truth. The dependent is all impermanent phenomena, and the consummate is all things that are ultimate truth. They have only one nature of their own, emptiness. Right? So Nagarjuna is saying all those things are empty of inherent existence. They're all the same. Their identities are constructed upon the mind. Right? So you could say they're imputed by the mind, according to Nagarjuna. 29. To those who delight in the great vehicle, the Buddha taught in brief selflessness in perfect equanimity, and that the mind is primordially unborn. So for those who are suitable to follow the Bodhisattva path, to practice the great vehicle, the Buddha taught that all things are equal in being empty of inherent existence. Right? So that's what he taught in the second turning of the wheel of Dharma. The proponents of yogic practices, the proponents of yoga practices is just another name for the mind-only school, assert that a purified mind effected through mastery of one's own mind and through utter transformation of its state is the object of its own reflective awareness. So this is talking about this self-cognizer, or it's a self-realizing cognizer. So that's something that is asserted to exist by the mind-only school, but is refuted by the consequentialist middle way school. That which is past is no more. That which is yet to be is not obtained or is not existing yet. As it abides in the present, its locus is utterly transformed. So how can there be such awareness in the present? So here, Nagarjuna is using this reasoning of the past, the present, and the future to refute that the mind has inherent existence. So the way he's refuting it is he's saying, that, when we look at our own mind, we can see that, our experiences of just a few moments ago, they've ceased to exist now. They don't exist in the present moment. So they're past. But why are they past? They're past in dependence upon the present moment, right? And the present moment exists. It is the present in dependence upon the past and the future, right? Without a present, there is no past, right? Without a past, there is no present. There are only things that, it's like without something being in the East, there is no something in the West. Without something being in the West, there is nothing in the East. Those are just relevant things, right? So, and also, what is the future? The future is, things that have not yet come into existence in the present, right? So the future exists independent, things are in the future independence upon the present and the past. But then when we look at the present moment, we can't find anything. Look at, I mean, literally try it right now. Look at your mind in the present moment. Of course, we do have an experience in the present moment, but it's like as soon as we cognize we're having an experience in this moment, that experience is gone. It's gone into the past, and it'll never happen again. Right? So it's like, you know, when we look at the present moment, it's kind of like trying to hold a very slippery fish that's wiggling like crazily, like it just slips out of your hand like immediately, or it's trying to, you know, pick up the water in a stream that's flowing by like right now. As soon as you lift your hand to pick it up, it's already gone. You know, think if you're in a fast moving like mountain stream and you're like, I want to pick up the water that's flowing by right now. As soon as you go to pick it up in your hand, it's already gone out and it's changed. So when we look at the present moment, as soon as we observe it, it's never ceases to change. So you can't find you know, some kind of inherently existent mind at all. So anyway, that's one way to analyze in terms of 3 times. Whatever it is not as it appears as. I think that's not so good grammar. Whatever it is, it's not what it appears to be, let's say. Whatever it appears as, it is not so. Consciousness is devoid of selfhood, yet consciousness has no other basis. Okay, so basically it's saying consciousness does not appear in the way it exists, right? The way it appears, even when we look at the mind, consciousness, it appears as if it is consciousness from its own side. That's not just a label that we place upon a group of different kinds of experiences or different parts, right? Different moments of mental experience. So hold on. So just to give you like a kind of a footnote, is like usually, you know, we say that, you know, nothing inherently exists because one reason, because it's everything that exists is labeled upon its parts, right? So first of all, everything that exists, whether it's a physical thing or a mental thing or a permanent thing, everything has parts. It's composed of parts. So physical things are the easiest, right? So look at any physical thing around you. Of course, guess what I'm going to use for my example? My mug, right? So any physical thing around you, it has parts, right? This has many, you know, the clay, the glaze, the die, the handle, the base, the rim, and all the atoms, the molecules that make it up. So those are all parts of the mug. So physical things, the easiest way to divide up physical things into their parts is you know, their physical parts, right? Their sides in space, and the physical particles that make them up, right? Yeah. So, you know, any of the parts that compose the mug, they're not the mug. All of the atoms, all of the molecules that make it up, and then the bigger parts, the rim, the base, the handle, the glaze, none of those things are the mug, right? But if you take all of those things away, you don't have any mug, right? So what is the mug? The mug is an object that's labeled upon this collection of parts. That's how it exists. So, but my main point here is when we analyzed it, how things are labeled upon their parts. You know, everything's labeled upon its basis, which is a collection of its parts. Physical things you divide up into their physical parts. How do you divide up the mind? Because we're looking mostly here at the mind. The mind, one way you can divide up is different kinds of experiences. We can see in each moment, our experience is slightly different than the moment before. So each moment, each instance or part, you know, we take our mind as a whole. We have memories, we have, you know, dreams about the future, we have judgments, we have, you know, visual images, we have perceptions of sound and taste and texture and so forth. So one is we have all different kinds of mental experiences, happy experiences, sad experiences, neutral experiences. One is we have different kinds of mental experiences. But another way, a more typical way to divide up our mind is in parts in time, right? So all of our different our sense consciousness, our mental consciousness, they're changing through time. So yeah, we can see how our mind, any mind is labeled upon parts in time. but it doesn't appear like it's merely labeled, right? Physical things, mental things, they don't appear as if they exist independent upon imputation by the mind. They appear as if they exist from their own side. So that's what he's talking about here. Whatever it is, it's not what it appears, right? It doesn't actually, it appears to exist from its own side, but it doesn't. Whatever it appears, it is not so. Consciousness is devoid of selfhood, yet consciousness has no other basis, right? So here again, when we're looking at Nagarjuna's negation of things, consciousness is devoid of selfhood. We always have to add in the qualifier, inherent existent, right? Inherently existent. So, and that's not something that, that qualifier of some things existing from their own side, things inherently existent. It's not as if we're just we're just adding that out of the blue. If you read the text carefully, and I'll try to point out in some of the verses as we go down, you can see, and this is really the brilliance of Tsongkhapa, is he really reads carefully the sutras, he reads carefully, Nagarjuna's commentaries by Aryadeva, Buddha Palita, Bhavaviveka, and finally Chandrakirti. And he really looks carefully at the sutras and the Indian commentaries and really clarifies what exactly are they negating when they say there is no selfhood, right? And it's not, I used to think, these Tibetans are just kind of, they love Tsongkhapa so much, so they're just, whatever Tsongkhapa, whatever way Tsongkhapa interprets these ancient Indian texts, they're just saying that, yeah, that's what they're saying, but there's no real basis. But, the more I've studied Tsongkhapa's commentaries and how much Tsongkhapa goes back to the ancient Indian commentaries and quotes them, you see, in my opinion, Tsongkhapa is really not adding something that's not there. He's really clarifying what actually is there in the text, although it's not easy to see it, right? So, so here, like, this is a typical line. Whatever it appears to be, it is not so. Consciousness is devoid of selfhood, right? So consciousness is devoid of selfhood, right? There's many different ways to interpret that, but what Nagarjuna means, to figure that out, you have to refer to other verses that have come before and that will come later. But I mean, maybe just to make my point a little stronger, I'll just zip up to the very beginning of the text. So we're on verse 32. We'll come back to that. But look right at the beginning of this. Oops, sorry, I went way too far. Okay. Look right at the beginning of this text, right? This is the beginning. The first line, devoid of all entities, right? So in that, what's added in bracket is substantive entities. That's a qualifier added by the translator. But here, this term entities, that's key. What does that mean? Utterly discarding all objects and subjects, such as aggregates, elements, and sense fields. Due to the sameness of selflessness of all phenomena, one's mind is primarily unborn. It is in the nature of emptiness, right? So all phenomena are devoid of entities, right? So that's the big question. What is that, that devoid of empty entities, what does that really mean? I'm just looking for another place where that comes up again. All right, here's another. No such permanent entity. Oh, that's a little different. I didn't make enough notes here so I can find. Anyway, we'll come back to it. It'll come up again below. So where were we? 32. Okay, 33. By being close to a lodestone. So do you guys know what a lodestone is? I had to look it up in a dictionary. A lodestone is a naturally occurring magnetic rock, right? So basically it's a magnet, but it's a naturally occurring magnet. So being close to a lodestone, an iron object swiftly moves forward. It possesses no mind of its own, yet it appears as if it does, right? So imagine there's a magnet and then you put it close to like a needle, the needle moves towards the magnet. So if you didn't know that the magnet is a magnet, you might think, oh, the needle likes that rock. It's moving towards it, right? That it possesses a mind of its own, but it does not. So this is an example of a false appearance. Likewise, the foundational consciousness, remember, that's aleya vijnana, asserted by the minority school. It too appears to be real, right? So here, real again means inherently existent, although it is false, right? In this way, it moves to and fro and retains the three realms of existence. So it acts as the basis for all of samsara. Just as the ocean and the trees move about, although they possess no mind, right? So the waves on the ocean, they move back and forth, but it's not like they're animate objects. They're inanimate objects. And the trees, they move, but they're not animated. So like that consciousness functions, but it doesn't have any existence from its own side. It doesn't exist by the power of its own entity or inherently. Likewise, foundational consciousness too moves about in dependence upon the body and mind. So the foundational consciousness, it depends upon other things. So you can see here, here's a kind of subtle, Nagarjuna is kind of getting at what he's refuting, right? Why? Because he's refuting that, remember, foundational consciousness. See, the words he uses above are not clear. He says, well, it has its own entity. Yeah, where did I go? Oh yeah, it has no selfhood. It possesses no mind of its own, right? But then what does that mean? Basically here he's saying because it's dependent upon the body, right? So it's dependent upon something else. That is the reason. So what does that mean he's rejecting? He's rejecting that it does not depend upon anything else. So that brings into that clarifies somewhat the object of negation is independent existence, a kind of existence where something does not depend upon anything else. How do we know that? Because he's giving as the reason for the lack of it existing, as a self, that it depends upon other things, right? So that's the kind of close reading you have to do to kind of get at the object of negation. All right, but I have to speed up going through these verses, or we're never going to get to verse 108 today. Right? So, but anyway, it's okay. We can finish tomorrow too. I'm not sure what His Holiness is going to do tomorrow. By the way, I didn't really catch it. Anyway, so if it is considered that without a body there is no consciousness, you must explain what this awareness is. That is the object of one's specific knowledge. Yeah. By calling it specific awareness of itself, you're asserting it to be an entity, right? So again, that entity is a key phrase. That always indicates inherent existence here. By calling it a specific awareness of itself, meaning existing in and of itself, you are asserting it to be an entity. Yet by stating it is this, you are asserting it also to be powerless. So here this powerless means that if mind inherently existed, if it existed by the force of its own power, then there would be the absurd consequence that it cannot interact with and be dependent upon other things in any way whatsoever. So therefore it can't function. It's powerless to function as a basis for the existence of other things. Okay, so from here begins the easy part of the text, right? So from here down is the consequentialist middle way assertion of their own view, right? So having ascertained oneself, so having known the truth oneself, and to help others ascertain it, the learned proceeds excellently, always without error. So the learned, once they realize the truth of how things actually exist, then they teach that to others. The cognizant perceives the cognizable. Without the cognizable, there is no cognition. Therefore, why do you not admit that neither object nor subject exists? So here the translator added at all, but I think that's not right actually, because the object of negation here is inherent existence, right? So I don't know why I'm showing you my note. That's just to remind me. But so here again we can based on Nagarjuna's presentation of his own view, we can get a clear idea of what he's refuting, right? So he's saying the cognizant perceives the cognizable. So the knower perceives objects that are known. But those two are mutually dependent. Without objects that are known, you can't have a knower. So, okay, you're probably getting tired looking at the document. So we'll come back. You can look at me and my mug. So, without a mug, I cannot be a person who realizes a mug, who cognizes a mug, right? And without me, the cognizer, cognizing a mug, the mug cannot exist. How can something exist if it's not an object of awareness of any consciousness at all, right? This is a big question. I mean, in the Buddhist philosophy, what is the definition of existent phenomena? That which is observed by a valid cognizer, right? That's a very deep, I mean, it's something we learned at the very beginning of our studies in Buddhist philosophy, but it's a very deep idea. And it, you know, that what does it mean for something to exist versus not exist, right? So in Buddhist philosophy, what it means, because, you know, and I think it's a little difficult for us, especially from a Western background, right? From a Western worldview, because in the Western world, especially now, the scientific materialism, the view that the world is fundamentally made up of matter, is a very strong view. And part of that view is that consciousness is just, hold on, my screen is frozen now, so I hope you all hear me. You do something if you can't hear me. So one consequence of this, you know, having, I think, innately growing up with this scientific materialistic view, is that there's a sense that consciousness and, you know, the phenomena of experiencing things in the world is just a byproduct of I think maybe, anyway, I won't say. I was saying, okay, I'm back. Sorry, my connection went out. So I was saying one kind of byproduct of, you know, kind of growing up with a scientific materialistic worldview, this view that the most fundamental stuff in the universe is matter, right? And so all of our consciousness experiences are just kind of, you know, something that just happened to come about because, because life started on Earth and then gradually evolved so that modern humans developed, and then modern humans developed this brains and nervous system. And because of that, we have this thing that we call conscious experience, but it doesn't have any real, it's not really that important, right? It's kind of a view of scientific materialism. So with that kind of worldview, we tend to think that, okay, my connection might go out again, but we tend to have a sense that the physical world is more real than anything else, right? That the physical world, that if something is physical, it's really there, and that physical things can exist on their own without consciousness, right? But we have to investigate if that's really true. I mean, if there's no consciousness, imagine if, like, in terms of like Darwinian evolution, imagine consciousness there were never any conscious beings on Earth, right? Until now, from the beginning of time until now, there were no living creatures. No, well, not in the English sense, but there were no sentient beings, you could say. There were no beings with mind. Nobody had a mind. From the beginning of time until now, nobody ever had there was never consciousness. It never happened. And then from now until the end of time, whenever that is, imagine nobody ever developed consciousness. So in that kind of world, can you say anything exists? What does it mean, for something to exist if there's no awareness of that? What's the difference between, something not existing and somebody not being aware of something existing? This is a big philosophical question, so I won't spend too much time on it, but it's a very important question, right? So, because back to this verse, right? Nagarjuna, so what here Nagarjuna is saying here in verse 39 is the cognizant, the knower, perceives the known. Without the cognizable, so without what is known, there is no cognition. So without an object of knowledge, there is no knowing. There's no act of knowing. And vice versa, without the act of knowing, there is nothing that is known, right? So that's what I'm getting at. Without the act of experiencing and knowing something, how can you say that there is an object that exists or that is experienced? You can't. They're mutually dependent upon each other. Therefore, why do you not admit? So the you here is the mind only, you mind only school people. Therefore, why do you not admit that neither object nor subject exists inherently, right? So remember, the mind-only school is saying that, consciousness is more fundamental. Consciousness inherently exists, and because of that, everything else can be posited to exist. Nagarjuna is saying consciousness is no more fundamental than the objects of awareness. Objects of knowledge and knowledge, they mutually depend upon each other. Neither one of them is more fundamentally, existing. And they're both empty of independent or inherent existence. Okay, then 40. The mind is but a mere name. Apart from its name, it exists as nothing. So view consciousness as mere name. Name too has no intrinsic nature. Oh, great. So here we come to the object of negation again, intrinsic nature, right? So we have to, all these different words that refer to the object of negation, remember entities at the very beginning, and then selfhood a little earlier, and here intrinsic nature. We have to connect all of those, right? So this is what I mean: intrinsic nature, inherent nature, inherently existing from its own side. Those all mean the same thing. So this is a really clear example of what Nagarjuna is negating. But this verse needs a little clarification because it can easily be misleading. When he says the mind is mere name, this is a big mistake I see people make all the time. They think, oh, when they hear the consequentialists say, which His Holiness was saying a lot today. I'm not sure how Tenzin Sepala was translating it, but His Holiness is saying again and again, things exist in mere name, right? Or things just exist in mere name, or things exist in mere name only, or things exist through the force of being named or imputation. So mental imputation or kind of verbal imputation, it's like naming. So when people hear that things exist in mere name, oftentimes people tend to think, oh, everything is just a name, right? But that's not the case, right? So it's like when we say that, like my mug again, when it exists in mere name, what it means is that on a collection of parts, none of which is the mug, we label mug, and thereby the mug comes into existence. But we're not saying that mug is just a label, like the name mug, or in Tibetan, there's a different word, gayu. In French, in every language, we have different labels. Those labels don't matter, right? And the mug is not any of those words, right? The mug is not a word. It's not a label. Also, the mug is not a thought. It's an object of language, right? So when we say mug, the word mug, it refers to this object. When we think mug, we have the concept mug. The mug is an object of that concept. So the mug is not a concept, it's not a word, but its existence depends upon the concept of mug, right? If there was never anyone that used this thing to like drink from, or have the idea that this is the thing that you use to like hold liquid and drink from, then it's not a mug, right? So like, yeah, kind of like that. So that here, when we read this, when it says the mind is but a mere name, really it's saying the mind exists in dependence upon being named. That's what it means. Apart from its name, it exists as nothing at all. So the mind exists in dependence upon its name, in dependence upon being labeled. Apart from that, it has no existence more than that. So view consciousness as a mere name. So here, it's not saying view that consciousness is a name. It's saying view that consciousness exists in dependence upon being named. Right? Name too, and then even the name and the act of naming, they also have no intrinsic nature. Right? It means they have no independent existence. 41. Either within or likewise without, or somewhere in between the two. The conquerors have never found the mind. You mean intrinsically existent mind. It doesn't exist. So the mind has the nature of an illusion. So what's the illusion? The mind, our own mind. So we have to check this in our own experience. Our own mind, it appears that it exists, this is my mind from its own side. But actually, how does it exist? Actually, I label mind, my mind, on a whole collection of parts, right? None of which are, the mind that's being labeled. So it appears to exist from its own side, but when we investigate, we find it doesn't exist from its own side. Rather, the mind exists independence upon parts, independence upon causes and conditions, and independence upon the act of naming or the act of mental imputation, right? So 42, the distinctions of colors and shapes, or that of object and subject, or male and female and neuter. The mind has no such fixed forms. Those are all just things imputed by the mind. In brief, the Buddhas have never seen, nor will they ever see, such a mind, right? Such a mind that exists from its own side. So, or that exists inherently or independently. So how can they see it as having intrinsic nature? That which is void of intrinsic nature, right? So how can they see as having intrinsic nature that which is devoid of intrinsic nature, right? So the Buddhas, because the Buddhas see things as they are, not like us. We see things in a way that's not like they are. Yeah. So here I think, so I'm going to jump to a different document now. You know, with my little document with quotations that His Holiness gave during the teaching today, because I'm pretty sure at about this point he would have given this quotation. All right, so first of all, this is from earlier, actually, this first quotation. Gonna move you guys over there if I can. Okay, so this was when His Holiness was talking about the Four Noble Truths. He gave this quote from Chandakirti. So again, I uploaded this. This is an updated version of the same document I was using yesterday. I uploaded it to the Google Drive link, which Felipe will share in the chat and online, I suppose. Right, Felipe? Okay. This suchness. So this is Chandakirti is from the very end of Entering the Middle Way. And he's just saying by meditating on emptiness, you can achieve the state of cessation, I think. Saying this suchness that just explained is most profound and terrifying, yet people with past habituation will certainly realize it. Others, however, despite vast learning, will fail to comprehend. Thus, seeing those other traditions as constructed by the author's own minds, as akin to the treatise that set forth propositions on the self, forsake admiration for treaties and systems contrary to this one. So His Holiness always chuckles when he quotes this verse, because here Chandakirti is being a little bit, in Tibetan you say hamba. It means a little bit like, I don't know, you don't want to say arrogant, but almost like very confident, you know. Chandakirti is being very confident that my system, my way of explaining emptiness and Nagarjuna's teachings is right, and other explanations of emptiness, like according to what's his name? Vasubandhu. According to Vasubandhu and Dignag and Dharmakirti, that they are wrong. Right? That's what he's saying here, basically. Anyway, then the second verse quoted. Oh yeah, so this is in this context of what we were just reading in commentary on Awakening Mind. I was thinking of this. His Holiness, actually here, His Holiness, those four absurd consequences, which I mentioned yesterday and gave the verses for, His Holiness quoted all four of those verses again, and again said that he himself recites and reflects on those verses every day, and that those verses, those four verses, of which this is the second one, that they are some of the strongest descriptions or most accurate descriptions of how to meditate on emptiness. Yeah, and the reasonings to establish the emptiness of inherent existence according to Chandakirti and Nagarjuna. So this one. Thus, when such phenomena are analyzed, nothing is found as their nature apart from suchness. Right? So their ultimate nature is just emptiness of inherent existence. So the conventional truth of the everyday world should not be subjected to thorough analysis. It means the conventional truth of the everyday world, if you look to see if it has existence from its own side, you'll find that it doesn't. There is nothing there from the side of the object, right? There is nothing there from the side of the object. It's merely imputed by the mind. But yet objects exist, right? They're conventional, they have their conventional nature exists and functions. We'll come back to that just a bit. Okay, let's continue with this text. Yeah, maybe I'll just explain for another 7 minutes or so, and then I'll ask for your questions. Here. Okay, so verse 44 here. Again, we come to the object of negation, entity in quotes. So remember, I was talking about at the very beginning of the text. I'll just show you again. The entity is an extremely important term. Remember the very first line of the text, devoid of all entities, right here. Extremely important term. The translator adds in the qualifier substantive entities, which means inherent existence. But so down here now in verse 44, finally, it's becoming more clear what that is. Entity is a conceptualization. Absence of conceptualization is emptiness. Where conceptualization occurs, how can there be emptiness? Right? So the kind of conceptualization Nagarjuna is talking about here is the ignorance grasping at inherent existence, right? Ignorance that projects the appearance of inherent existence onto things. Ignorance that conceives of things as existing as entities, means as existing from their own side, right? So the absence of that ignorance is the wisdom, realizing emptiness. Where there is this ignorance which conceives of things as inherently existing, there cannot be wisdom understanding emptiness. So in this verse, Nagarjuna is very clearly making these two opposites. Wisdom realizing the lack of inherent existence, and versus ignorance grasping at entities or inherent existence. Okay. 45, the mind in terms of the perceived and the perceiver, this the Tathagatas have never seen. So there we have to add in the qualifier inherently existent, perceived and perceiver. The Tathagatas have never seen. Where there is the perceived and perceiver, there is no enlightenment, right? So again, we have to add in the qualifier where there is the perceiver and perceived grasp that as existing from their own side, there is no enlightenment. Devoid of characteristics and origination, devoid of substantive reality, transcending speech. So this is an important qualifier again, substantive reality, right? So that justifies the translator adding that qualifier in the very first line, substantive entities, because that's what's being negated. So devoid of characteristics and or origination means like being produced from its own side, devoid of substantive reality, transcending speech, space, awakening mind, enlightenment, possess the characteristics of non-duality, right? So here we come back to, I think it was Organ's question in the chat box, which I've lost my chat box here because I lost my internet connection. But he was, I think it was Organ was asking what is non-duality, or someone else, I forget who. Anyway, they're asking what is non-duality. Yeah, there's different meanings of non-duality. But here, in this verse, Nagarjuna is saying that here he's using non-duality to refer to, things having the nature of being empty of inherent existence and being one nature with that entity, right? So, because he's talking about emptiness here, and that enlightenment and basically all things possess the characteristics of non-duality. So he's saying basically like this. If we take my mug as an example again, the mug, is it a conventional truth or an ultimate truth? Hold up one if you think it's a conventional truth. Hold up one finger. Hold up two fingers if you think it's an ultimate truth. Yeah, okay, one finger. Yeah, it's great. You guys, my Zoom room is awesome here. So you all got it right. Yeah. So the mug is a conventional truth. But now this is a little more difficult. Does the mug have an ultimate truth? Hold up one if you think yes. Does the mug, so the mug is a conventional truth. Does it have an ultimate nature? Let's say it that way. Does it have an ultimate nature? Hold up one if you think yes, and two fingers if you think no. All right, Kundan's got one. Maya's got one. Come on, Dilshad. Don't be shy. Two. Yeah. No. The mug, it has an ultimate nature. The mug is empty of inherent existence. It's empty. I'm gonna have to be careful. I'm gonna spill water on my laptop keyboard here. I'll drink the water here. The mug's the mug's emptiness of inherent existence is its ultimate nature, and that nature is part of the mug, right? It's what enables the mug to be seen, to affect other things, to interact with other things, because it's empty of inherent nature. Therefore, it can exist in dependence upon other things, in relation to other things. It can interact with other things. So, why am I talking about this? Oh yeah, so non-duality, right? Non-duality. So the mug's ultimate nature. Okay, so I'll ask you one more question. Third question. The mug is a conventional truth, but it has an ultimate nature. It's emptiness of inherent existence. So the mug's ultimate nature is that one entity with the mug or a different entity from the mug, right? So the mug's ultimate nature, its emptiness of inherent existence, is that one nature with the mug or a different nature from the mug. So if you think it's one nature, hold up one finger. If you think it's a different nature, hold up two fingers. One nature, one nature. Yes, you're all right. Again, exactly. The mug's emptiness of inherent existence, of course, it's a property of the mug, just like the weight of the mug, the texture of the mug, the color of the mug, they're all one nature with the mug, right? So the mug's, the fact that it is a mug is one nature with the mug. The fact, anyway, its emptiness of inherent existence is one nature with the mug. So being one nature with the mug means it's non-dual with the mug. It's not separate from. It's one entity with. So in that sense, it's non-dual. In that sense, all phenomena are non-dual with their ultimate nature. Their ultimate nature is one entity. It's part of them. You cannot separate it from them. So that's one meaning of non-dual, is that everything, is non-dual with its ultimate nature, its emptiness of inherent existence. Okay. So I'm going to stop there today. So where are we here? So you all remember for tomorrow, we got up to verse 46. Okay. I'll put a little, let's see, a little red highlight here so I don't forget. Boom. Okay. So we'll continue from verse 47 tomorrow. Or today if you have no questions whatsoever. Let's see. Anyway, if you have questions now, I'll try to answer some questions. Okay, so there's already one question in the chat box. I think one thing is to refute the inherent existence of alaya vijnana, but why refute it altogether? Alaya, can't it exist conventionally? Furthermore, alaya vijnana is present in some systems and schools of Tibetan Buddhism, like the Kagyu Sakya Nyingma Madhyamaka says that there is external existence and alaya vijnana doesn't have true existence, but conventionally it's a very convenient way of explaining things about how karma works and what carries karma from lifetime to lifetime. Okay, so yeah, so someone's saying the alaya vijnana is asserted to exist. Well, first of all, you have to be careful because the term alaya vijnana, it can mean things in different contexts, right? It's a very kind of flexible term. So when we're talking in terms of the mind-only school, alaya vijnana does refer to this eighth consciousness, or the foundation of consciousness, which is the one that goes from life to life. So why does, okay, so the first part of the question was, why refute it altogether? Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I think, the answer that appears immediately to my mind, which I'm not sure is the best answer, but I have to give you my best answer, right? I'm not sure it's the best answer, but is that you don't need it, actually. It doesn't do anything that you can't explain by just asserting mental consciousness, right? Because mental consciousness itself, it goes from life to life. So for the consequentialist middle way school, It's the mental consciousness, the sixth consciousness. Mental consciousness goes life to life, goes from life to life. It is a receptacle for all the imprints of karma and afflictive emotions and memories and so forth. So you don't need this additional eighth consciousness to to be a basis for the person who goes from life to life, and to be a basis for carrying the imprints of karma and so forth that go from life to life. That's one refutation. I mean, one reason, although that's not really a strong refutation. I know there are several other reasons to refute it, which I don't remember offhand right now. But just to back to what I was saying a little bit earlier, that alaya, that word in Tibetan, it's kunshi, right? Alaya Vajnana is translated as kunshi in Tibetan. So that phrase, it can refer to at times to just like a subtle level of consciousness which goes life to life. So remember, I mean, in the sutras, when we're looking in the in the sutra presentation of Buddhism, not tantra, right, as opposed to tantra, the sutra presentation of Buddhism, there's the five sense consciousness and the six mental consciousness. The mental consciousness is of course more subtle than the sense consciousness. But within mental consciousness, there's not a lot of discussion of differences of subtlety between coarser and more subtle levels of consciousness. That discussion comes primarily a little bit in the third turn of the Wheel of Dharma, but primarily in Tantra, right? So in the context of Tantra, when you see the term alaya vijnana, it can sometimes be talking about a subtle level of mental consciousness, which is I mean, depending on the presentation, that can well be just part of the sixth consciousness. It's just a more subtle type of mental consciousness, type of the sixth consciousness. It doesn't have to be asserted as a separate continuum of consciousness. So that's another difficult, I mean, kind of question comes up for alaya vijnana. How is it, is it really substantially different from the mental consciousness, right? Basically, the main kind of question is, isn't it just another kind of mental consciousness? Why do you have to separate it out as something different? Yeah. But then your question includes the Kagyu Sakya Nyingma, which I'm not, I haven't studied much in those the presentations according to those schools, so I can't say in any authoritative way like what the similarity or differences in their discussion of the alaya vijnana. Wouldn't you say that it's subtler from, say, our daily life consciousness? That last explanation makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Yes, definitely. I mean, just think about our mental consciousness. I mean, from our daily life consciousness. Okay, so our daily life consciousness is a very vague term. I mean, that includes like everything from drinking coffee to, I don't know, just meditating, right? So I mean, any mental consciousness is more subtle than a sense consciousness, right? Our eye, ear, nose, tongue, body consciousness, they're very gross, they're very coarse. So when we think about something, when we imagine something, we remember something, those are all more subtle levels of consciousness. But then, when we talk about what the mind-only school is talking about, alaya vijnana, it's this consciousness that goes from life to life in an unbroken continuum, right? So even if we don't assert the existence of that alaya vijnana, we have to assert the existence of a continuum of consciousness that goes from life to life, right? Otherwise, there's no possibility of a person taking rebirth, right? Which is a fundamental tenet of Buddhism. And otherwise, there's no way to explain the first moment of consciousness at the time of conception. You'd have to, if there's no consciousness going from life to life, then you'd say the first moment of awareness at the time of conception or soon thereafter is produced by physical things, right? By the sperm and egg cell of our parents coming together or something like that, right? Which just doesn't make sense, because just to say that physical things produce consciousness, because they're fundamentally different kind of stuff, right? So So all the Buddhist, tenet schools assert the existence of an unbroken stream of consciousness going from life to life. The difference is the mind-only school sets that out as like a separate continuum. It's separate from the mental consciousness. Whereas all the other three schools all assert that continuum of consciousness going from life to life is just one aspect of the sixth consciousness, the mental consciousness, right? But, look at your own experience. We can see when we go to sleep, our sense consciousness stops functioning. But we know that, how do you know that there's a continuum of mental consciousness while you're asleep? One is because your sleeping body is not a corpse, right? If there were no mental consciousness conjoined with your body while you're asleep, your sleeping body would be no difference from a corpse, right? That's one. That's the easy one. The other is because, even when we're sleeping, our sleep is not all uniform. We have periods of deep sleep. We have periods of shallow sleep. We have dreams. We have periods of dreaming. So, the fact that we dream while we're asleep shows that there's some consciousness active, even while we're sleeping, even while the sense consciousness are dormant, right? That's another one. And then the fact that we wake up in the morning, right? What if there was no, consciousness functioning at some level while we're asleep, then just like, if there was no consciousness before the time of our conception, how do you explain the production of a moment of consciousness at the very first moment of this life? The same problem would come at the very moment of waking up, right? If there was no stream of consciousness functioning while we're asleep, how do you explain the existence of consciousness at the moment we wake up, right? You can't. So there has to be some stream of consciousness going, from the period of falling asleep to the period of waking up, just like there has to be a stream of consciousness going from the time of death through the bardo, into birth, and then continuing through life to death again. So, but that level of consciousness is more subtle than even the mental consciousness we experience during our waking state, right? So another example of that is to see when you're dreaming, do you have as much control over your mind as you have while you're awake, even in just your thoughts, in terms of your thoughts? No, I think, while we're awake, we can kind of decide, yeah, I want to think about this. I don't want to think about this. I want to look at this. I don't want to look at that. While we're dreaming, we really don't have control. So that's kind of also indicative that it's a more subtle kind of consciousness, even while we're dreaming. And then, of course, at the time of death, it's an even more subtle kind of level of consciousness. So, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, so that stream of consciousness goes from life to life. Yeah, it's more subtle than our daily life consciousness. Okay, more questions? Anybody want to ask a live question? Exciting. You can raise your virtual hand in the participants box, I think, or you can just wave frantically in front of your screen. I don't know if you can turn on your video yourself or not. But
They can turn their video themselves.
okay, you can turn your videos on, everyone. So. Felipe, can we play some background music while we wait for questions to arise?
Okay, I have.
Which,
I could be a
which
background
song do
music
you want, Venerable? Which song do you like?
Okay, Maya.
Do you like the band Nirvana?
I'm not so sure you want me to chant right now, but
I think the Eurythmics. We should play the Eurythmics.
yeah.
Okay, Maya.
No, because I was wondering when we were talking about how much control we have about this, because everything that we have that we do right now is affected by karma, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, sorry, my connection is cutting out. I can't hear you guys.
No,
Okay,
I
hold
was
on.
wondering
Hold on,
how
Maya, I
much
can
control
just hear
have.
you now. I didn't hear anything until now. Can you repeat?
Yes, I can try. I was wondering regarding to the control that we have over our mind, you know, when we are awake,
Mhm.
because we are also know about that too. How much really control do we have on our minds? And sometimes I'm thinking, you know, in my dreams, there is sometimes things that comes up to the surface, right? That maybe I suppressed during my awakening time, and this is maybe sometimes more of a control that I have
Mhm.
on my mind. But and also you can do practices that I mean I've never learned about them, you know, thoroughly or really tried them.
Oh, dream
That's like
yoga.
yoga dream and stuff like that.
Yeah, dream
Yeah.
yoga. Yeah. How much control do we have over our minds? Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, even in, you know, in people's waking state, from person to person, there's a lot of variety, I think. You know, you can see some people, they really don't have much control over their minds at all. Like an obvious example is someone with Down syndrome. I mean, unfortunately, or many, you know, severe mental illness. There's very little control over their mind. I mean, or animals, obviously, right? But even among sane, I mean, human beings that don't have any, you know, special, you know, like think someone with like alcoholism or what is it? Obsessive compulsive disorder. There's a real lack of control of the mind in some aspects, right? In some ways. And then, you know, look at yourself, of course, ourselves. And that it varies, right? Sometimes we might have more control over our mind, but in other situations, like when we're tired, we're hungry, we're frustrated, we have less control, right? So like that. But I mean, in terms of dreams, His Holiness often mentions one thing I find very helpful to think about. What His Holiness mentions is that, you know, well, I mean, our minds are largely creatures of habit, right? They're things of habit. So generally, if we habituate ourselves to thinking in certain ways, looking at things in certain ways, then it becomes easier and easier to do that, right? And we just more and more naturally think of things in that way. So as a nice example of that, His Holiness gives the example of like, you know, himself being a monk, the awareness that he's a monk. You know, one of the advices when you become ordained as a monk or nun is to try to generate the discrimination again and again that I'm an ordained person, right? And then His Holiness says often, you know, the kind of evidence that you've done that effectively is that even in your dreams, you have the discrimination that I'm an ordained person, right? And so, I mean,
Okay.
yeah, I've seen in my own experience, I've seen, yeah, that it happens. Not that it doesn't happen for me. For me, it doesn't happen all the time. But yeah, quite often when, you know, when I'm having a dream, then I either appear as a monk or just, you know, get into some situation and I remember, oh, I'm a monk and I shouldn't do that, right? So that's kind of, and that's through the force of habituation. So that's just an example of how when we habituate ourselves to seeing ourselves in a certain way. So this is very useful to think about in relation to like low self-esteem or negative self-image. That's something that we create. If we think about our own faults and think about how we're less than others, think about mistakes that we make, and we mentally put ourselves down again and again, that's a self, it's like a self-creating prophecy. It's a kind of a self-reinforcing mechanism. So we just naturally see ourselves in a very negative way, and it's very destructive. It's very harmful. So we need to recognize, but it's something that we entirely create. It's not that there's some ultimate, you know, objective reality to what that negative mind sees, right? So it's very important to try to see ourselves and see other things in a positive way. Look at positive qualities that really exist and put our energy into those, because that will cause those positive qualities to develop. Whereas if we put our energy into negative things we see, actually it's like we're creating causes for those negative things to increase, right? Which is very destructive. That's why it's destructive. So yeah, the mind is really a creature of habituation.
Thank you.
Sure. Other questions? That's one question from Israel. Now we have someone from Germany, someone from India here.
Well, there was this question from Facebook that I sent to your chat, but probably
Okay, I see.
lost it.
Wouldn't you say, right? No, not that one.
No, not that one. It was about I'll read it to you. It says, I heard the case of a boy who was very aggressive and cruel to animals. He tortured birds, cats, etc. And no drug had any effect on him. But later they discovered that he had a brain tumor. When the tumor was removed, he became a normal child. Could this be an example to show that the mind is an effect of the matter, the brain?
Yeah, definitely that's evidence that goes in that direction, but it doesn't prove that, right? So definitely, I mean, I think as Buddhists, we have to accept that there's a strong correlation between the function of the brain and different aspects of the mind, right? And even aspects of a person's character. So, I mean, traditionally, that kind of behavior that boy was exhibiting, we would explain that it's from imprints from past lives. But then if it's the case that there was a tumor in the brain, and when that tumor was removed, then that behavior completely changed, or the personality completely changed. Yeah, that's definitely evidence then that it was something, the way the brain was functioning, that was causing that kind of behavior, so the kind of thoughts and perceptions that led to that behavior. And there's other examples of that, like that, where people's, like we know that people's brains get damaged and they'll lose memory, or or their personality changes. They become much more gentle and kind, or they become much more, aggressive and angry. So there's definitely a correlation between the function of the brain and different levels of consciousness. There's no question about that. But what we were talking about here, and what His Holiness makes again and again makes the assertion that there are very subtle levels of consciousness which can exist independent from the brain, right? Which don't depend upon the brain. So that's the kind of consciousness that goes from life to life. And then even there's other kind of evidence that, well, like when we have a thought, anyway, this kind of problem comes about. If every thought, or like intentional thought we have to do something, if that's a product of our brain, then we have no free will, right? Why? Because do you control what happens in your brain? No, like we don't even have any sense of what's going on in our brain, right? And unfortunately, our brain, like I was thinking about, if our brain is like an Android phone, like a smartphone, like we don't have any sense of what's going on in the phone, right? How the phone works, the motherboard, or I don't know if there even is a motherboard in a smartphone, but the circuitry and the electronic signals and so forth, that's in our phone. We don't know how that works, but we can control what goes on because they're buttons. There are like tabs, and there's a touch screen. There's stuff we can touch on the touch screen to affect what goes on in the phone. But for your brain, is there a touch screen, like an equivalent of a touch screen for your brain, where you can manipulate different things and change like what's happening in your brain? Apart from consciousness, right? Not mind, not consciousness. Because if we're saying that consciousness is a result of what's going on in the brain, then to affect what goes on in our mind, we have to first change what happens in our brain, right? So how do you change what happens in your brain? You can drink coffee and maybe you feel more excited or something, or I don't know, you exercise and you feel more kind of relaxed, or I don't know. But those are all very roundabout ways of affecting what goes on in the brain. So one argument is that, from the Buddhist point of view, actually our thoughts affect our brain, right? So when we think things, it's like, say, when we meditate on loving kindness, for example, or we practice mindfulness meditation or loving kindness meditation, neuroscientists can look at the brain and see there are changes in the activity of the brain. So the real hardcore materialist would say, well, somehow you're manipulating the brain and that's causing you to feel more loving kindness, right? But that's totally counterintuitive. It's totally against common sense. From the point of view of our experience, it looks like we are intentionally, trying to generate more mindfulness, or trying to generate more mental focus, or the attitude of loving kindness, thinking may I be well, may I be happy, may my family and all sentient beings, may they be well, may they be happy. And we can generate some genuine experience of loving kindness. That's more than when we don't do that, right? So from our just common sense point of view, it looks like we do something with our mind and that affects our brain, right? So it looks like, there's a correlation between the mind and the brain. So a materialist will say mind is just a product of the brain. Mind is what the brain does, right? All our mental experience is an outcome of brain activity. Whereas the Buddhist and any idealist, we want to say that, well, the correlation goes both ways. So in the example of that person gave, there can be a tumor or some other way of physically affecting the brain, and that can cause you to have certain mental experiences. But you can also cause yourself to have certain mental experiences, and that affects your brain, right? So the causation goes the other way, right? Okay, there's another question in the chat here, or two. Okay, so someone asked, when it comes to seeing our true nature, what consciousness do we use, the sixth or the eighth? We use the sixth. So remember, according to the middle way school, and especially the consequentialist middle way school, there is no eighth consciousness, right? There's only six consciousness. The sixth consciousness is the mental consciousness, right? So all the things, according to the mind only school, there are eight consciousness. So and that eighth consciousness, the alaya vijnana, or the foundational consciousness. So for the mind only school, all the stuff that consciousness does, all those functions are performed by the sixth consciousness as posited by the consequentialist middle way school. All right, then someone asked, Andre asked, you've mentioned non-duality. As I understand, according to Chitta Mantra, we can experience objects directly, only holograms in our mind. It means that me, my mind, and all phenomena are non-dual. But according to Lama Tsongkhapa view, Buddha can experience not only ultimate reality, but also common sense phenomena of reality, relative reality, which I don't experience with my samsaric mind. What is non-duality from the Gelug point of view? Yeah. So I was saying, Andre, that there's different meanings of non-duality in different contexts, right? So the one I was talking about was the non-duality of ultimate and conventional truth, that they exist as part of as one nature. They're interdependent. But then, you're talking about a couple different things. So according to Chitta Mantra school, the mind-only school, when they're talking about non-duality, they usually mean non-duality of subject and object, right? So that might have been the term someone asked about the translator using subjective reality and objective reality. That's probably what he's talking about in relation to mind-only school. That the subject and object, so that means a consciousness, remember my example, my eye consciousness and my mug that sees the mug, right? So I have eye consciousness and a mug which appears to the eye consciousness or apprehends it. So according to mind-only school, both the eye consciousness and the mug that is seen by it, they're both arise from the same cause, the imprint, an imprint that's in my mind. And therefore, they're part of the same entity, right? So the mug is essentially, it's just an appearance to my eye consciousness. And that appearance is somehow like one entity with my eye consciousness. It's not a consciousness, but it's an appearance. Just like, the best example to understand mind-only school is always dreams. Always go back to your dreams. Just like, when we dream, if I see a mug in a dream, the mind to which the mug appears and the mug that appears are clearly, they're part of the same thing. They're part of this mental phenomenon. But one aspect of that mental phenomena is an observer, and one aspect of it is something that is observed, but they're both produced by the same kind of energy in the mind. In the case of a dream, that's very clear. So the mind-only school is saying, in the case of our waking life, it's the exact same thing. What appears as an external existent mug or an external existent world, those are just appearances to my mind. They have no more objective reality than that. Right? So for the mind-only school, that's the main non-duality when they talk about non-duality of subject and object. That the subject and object are essentially part of the same stuff, just like our dreams. In our dreams, the observer and the things that observe are part of the same thing. So that's totally different than what Lama Tsongkhapa is talking about. Okay, so then you mentioned for a Buddha that only a Buddha can simultaneously with one mind directly perceive both ultimate truth and conventional truth, or ultimate phenomena, emptiness, and conventional phenomena. That's true, yeah. As long as we're, for any sentient being, as long as we're a sentient being, for one particular consciousness, in any one moment, any consciousness only either observes a conventional phenomena or it observes an ultimate truth, emptiness. It cannot simultaneously perceive both. So, I mean, look at my example of the mug again. You know, I can have, so of course, for a sentient being, the sense consciousness will not observe ultimate truth ever. So I can remember, you know, my mug. So then that memory consciousness is always mental. So I remember the mug or anything. That's a mental consciousness observing that object. But then I analyze to see whether it inherently exists or not. So if I do the analysis well, I have a correct understanding of emptiness, I can analyze to see, I'm observing the mug and analyzing to see if it inherently exists or not, if it exists from its own side. And I can arrive at the insight, the realization that it doesn't inherently exist at all. It's totally empty of inherent existence. At that moment, that mental consciousness, all that appears to it is emptiness, right? So it realizes only ultimate truth. It doesn't, but that consciousness, so there's a lot of discussion. Does that, so that's a conceptual consciousness, first of all. Does that conceptual consciousness also realize the mug? Some say yes, and some say no. Even those who say yes, they say only indirectly, not directly, right? But that's a conceptual consciousness. So sentient beings, for those who say that, you know, the conceptual consciousness realizing that the mug is empty of inherent existence, even if they say that that conceptual consciousness also indirectly realizes the mug, that's okay. That's not a problem yet. But what would be a problem? So then we meditate on that conceptual consciousness, realizing the emptiness of the mug. We meditate on that. We become habituated, familiar with it. Again, more and more and more. We generate single-pointed concentration, realizing that. We accumulate merit. We purify obscurations, and gradually that conceptual consciousness, it transforms into what's called a yogic direct perceiver, right? A non-conceptual consciousness realizing emptiness. So that yogic direct perceiver directly realizing emptiness, all that appears to that yogic direct perceiver is the emptiness of inherent existence of the mug. Nothing else appears. That yogic direct perceiver definitely cannot realize anything that is a conventional truth directly, right? No conventional truth appears to that mind, right? Indirectly, even maybe it can, maybe it can't. There's a debate about it, but definitely it cannot directly realize any conventional truth. All that appears to that mind is ultimate truth. In this case, the emptiness of inherent existence of the mug, and there is a sense of being non-dual with that, right? There is a kind of breakdown of the sense of separateness of subject and object there. So that's one kind of non-duality there. But so then that's for a sentient being. So sentient beings with a direct perceiver, they only realize either an ultimate truth or a conventional truth, never both simultaneously and directly. for a Buddha, Buddhas only realize everything with a direct perceiver and directly. Buddhas don't realize anything indirectly, right? They realize everything directly. And they don't realize anything conceptually. They don't have concepts. They realize everything as a direct experience, right? It's the fullest, richest possible way to experience an object. And the Buddhas continually abide in, anyway, I won't go into it now, but they continually abide in direct realization of the ultimate truth of all phenomena and directly realizing all conventional phenomena. So we should stop here. We're already a little over time. So let's just briefly dedicate. So yeah, just rejoice, think of all the merit we've created through this review session, and the merit created by all of our holy teachers, as well as the Dalai Lama, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, and all of lineage lamas back to Shakyamuni Buddha himself. So rejoice in all the merit. And then all this merit we dedicate that the Buddha Dharma flourish in the world, in all worlds, and in our own minds, and through our own actions. And especially may all of our gurus have long and stable lives, especially His Holiness the Dalai Lama. May his life be long and stable. May all of his holy wishes be accomplished exactly according to his wishes. And may all of our actions only be pleasing to the Guru. And then this global pandemic may quickly be eliminated. And also may there be a transformation in people's minds in the world. May all anger, hostility, jealousy, greed, selfishness be completely eliminated and replaced with altruism, kindness, compassion, generosity, and wisdom. In short, may all sentient beings be free from every form of suffering and quickly be free from samsara and quickly achieve full enlightenment. Okay, thank you very much. And may all of Tushita's holy activities flourish, especially tomorrow on Labat Duchen. There is from 2 to 3:30, I think, Serkon Center Rinpoche is giving a teaching online, so about repaying the kindness of the Guru. So you should definitely attend that if you can. It'll be excellent teaching, I'm sure. And then, yeah, we'll do another review session tomorrow night. Okay, so thank you all and adios.
Well, if I could request you right before you go, if you could upload, because we had a couple of breakups in your voice. If you could upload once it's finished converting the recording on the Google Drive.